Hi guys, how's it going? My name is Haley of Mothchild Cosplay, and today I'm here to talk to you guys about a little summer springtime wardrobe update that I have done. We're calling this goth not because everything is like super goth, but because this is all primarily black, and I just feel like that's the easiest category to say everything fits into. We're only going to be doing 4 pieces today. The reason that that is versus doing a bunch is number one, I'm not the kind of person where I really need a lot of different clothes or variety. I actually work in a construction area, and so my required dress code for work is like long jeans and t-shirts. So that's kind of primarily what I wear day to day. But I figured because I got into weightlifting a couple of years ago, and I haven't done a really good update to my wardrobe since then, a lot of my old clothes, they just don't fit like they used to. My shoulders have grown, as have my lats, and so a lot of blouses or dresses are just a little too small. So instead of trying to go online and fight with the different size charts of different websites and find clothes that not only look good and are flattering and comfortable, but also fit me, I'll just make my own. This isn't anything too crazy for me. I've been a seamstress for about 10 years now, and these garments were really quick for me to whip up. Each one took about a week, give or take, and that's just from the moment that I cut my pattern out to the moment that I put my last stitch in. Another reason that I chose to sew my wardrobe versus buying stuff online is I went onto a couple of different websites and I added up into my cart every garment that I liked. But when I did add into my cart everything, it was going to be over $500. Some of these garments from the websites, they are nicely made, the quality is good, and the cost is worth it for people that want to spend that money. Not for bitches like me who don't have a really big allowance every month to spend on clothes. So it was either spend $500 to get like 5 things, or spend $120 on fabric and notions to make exactly what I wanted. I went to Fabric Wholesale District to find my fabrics, and I settled on 5 total fabrics. I'll talk about each of these fabric choices whenever we start making those garments, and I'll talk about why I picked it, the cost, and if it worked well for this garment or not, so you can kind of save your time. I also went ahead and as I picked out these fabrics and began working with them, recorded a little video of me like flinging it around. Now that Joann's is closed, and for the US there's not a lot of really large fabric retailers, it's hard to find good videos that show how a fabric moves. So I figured I might be able to save you guys a little bit of time with some of this by just showing you what I've got. Anyway, now that we are past the formalities, let's go ahead and jump in, starting with this awesome caftan that I was inspired by Noctex to make. We're starting out strong with this beautiful gauze fabric that I got once again from Fabric Wholesale District. I will have a link to them in our bio. I went with this material because it's a pretty traditional material for making a caftan. It's nice and beautiful. It has a beautiful texture and a gorgeous drape, and it gives you a lot of coverage without being too heavy for the summer. A friend of mine a long time ago sent me a bunch of vintage patterns. This one's from 1992, and this is actually what I'm going to be using to make my caftan. Pretty great, right? We love to reduce, we love to reuse and recycle here. Yas, always and forever. Getting my pattern pieces out. As you can see, these were already cut out. They were cut out to be a size large. I'm not actually a size extra large. Oh my goodness, I'm not an extra large for many reasons. But oversized caftan is perfectly acceptable. I ended up taking this down to a size large, I believe. I'm sure somebody out there will give me a hard time for taking the size down in a vintage pattern and like cutting into it, but frankly, if I wasn't using it, it would probably be literally in the garbage. Here I am laying down next to my fabric in a very professional way before cutting it to make sure that I like the length. I decided it was a little too long, so I measured and took off about 6 inches from the bottom and then began cutting out my fabric. I have these awesome pattern weights that were given to me by Candace over at Plexi Cosplay like years ago. You can see they have been loved, well loved. I really need to make some more because some of the little details have come off of the ones that I had, or I've lost them over time. But anyway, with my fabric cut out, I went ahead and I started sewing up all of my seams. Super simple, basic little straight stitch. Nothing too crazy over here. And with my shoulder seams done, I tried it on. I didn't know exactly how long I wanted the sides to be stitched down, so I went ahead and put it on before stitching anything so I'd make sure that I was happy with the length that I'd give myself. On the shoulder seams, I also went ahead and flat felled these seams, meaning I trimmed one side down, pressed my seams over, folded the raw edges in, and then carefully stitched it down. I like to do this from the outside edge. I feel like it gives me a little bit more control over what the outside is going to look like in terms of the distance of my stitch from the seam, but really I think it's preferred to do it from the inside. Along these side edges, I wanted to do a rolled hem for the sides, so I needed to do a little trim to make sure that I could separate that from the seam allowance that would be further up before going and rolling this under to do a little hem. While I was really satisfied with how crisp my iron was able to get this, it's definitely nice with a stretchy fabric like gauze to pin it down before you start sewing. Gauze isn't super stretchy in the traditional sense, but when you mess with it, because it has all that woven built-in texture, it does have a little bit of give, and that sort of thing can kind of impact the finished garment. So I like to try to remove any variables like that. With the sides stitched up, all I needed to do was add in some darts. I put darts in because although I like looking like an amorphous blob, I wanted to look a little bit less so. And here they are sewn in, and I'm super happy with how this turned out. But of course, no garment on this channel is finished without a little moth child tag in the back. This is kind of shitty, I'll be really honest, but it's a cute little detail that makes me really happy. And I like being able to look into my closet and pull out a garment and see, oh yeah, I made that. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. This next garment is a nice simple little tank dress that I made using some shiny moleskin tricot and some power mesh from Fabric Wholesale Direct. I said district earlier, I don't know why I did that, please forgive me. Anyway, I loved these fabrics. They worked out perfectly. There was a lot of stretch, and because they're stretch and they had a nice body to them, I was actually able to utilize a dress that I had already in my closet to get a general sense of the pattern, and a workout top that I love the look of the top for, to combine them and get the exact look that I wanted. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a commercial pattern that had the seam lines and, you know, the neckline that I wanted. Being very frank though, I didn't look very hard. I knew that this was a very simple design that I could quickly draw out a pattern for and put together over the course of a couple of days. And that's what you see me doing here. I traced out the outline of that dress that I showed earlier, and here I held up the top of my sports bra to get a good idea of how that neckline should be shaped. I'll admit, I'm a little lazy when it comes to making patterns for stretch garments because there's a lot of room for mistake with still coming out with a good garment in the end, so we kind of just wing it. You saw my little sketched out pattern, and here I'm laying out this dress that fits me really well so I can trace around it to know what to cut out. I know it sounds a little simple and kind of goofy, but honestly, especially if you're new to sewing, taking garments that you already have and kind of figuring out how those shapes make what you want, or how they really make the garment, is a great way to learn. That, and going to Goodwill and buying cheap fabric, or really anything from Goodwill, and taking it apart just to see how it's constructed. But with my dress laid out, I take this awesome little chalk pen that I have, and I'm tracing all along the sides here. I'm gonna also trace the shoulder lines, and I'm gonna measure out how long I want my finished dress to be so I can mark the hem as well onto this fabric. With my lines marked out, I can remove the dress and I can put down, oh, my pattern, that's a very professional seamstress pose that you see. Yep, you gotta stand right over your fabric like that. There's obviously no other more effective way to do this. And I'm going to trace out the lines for the front top of this dress based off the pattern that I drew. This dress is kind of reversible. I mean, it's stretched, so it's really forgiving, and I kind of like the idea of the front and the back being the same. So I'm not making any modifications to this pattern for the front or the back, which was nice because I didn't have to do extra work. But I will also admit it was a little frustrating at times when I was trying to figure out what was going where later on in this process. That's fine, we got there in the end. And with all of my lines sketched out onto my fabric, I got to cut this out not once, but twice, because we are doing one layer of this Moleskine tricot and then another layer of that awesome power mesh that I got. The dress that I was looking at to kind of reference looked really cool, and I have a couple of other dresses in my wardrobe that have like that double layer of a nice opaque fabric on the inside and then a fun mesh on the outside. And I also, as you can see, used clips for this. This stuff was also pretty prone to moving around and wiggling, so clips were pretty convenient to work with. This fabric is pretty stretchy, so you can't just use a standard straight stitch whenever you're working with it. You can see here on my machine, I'm using an interesting little stretchy stitch. It's one that I actually hadn't used too much before last year, but it's notated on my machine with 3 little straight stitch looking lines. And here I'm demonstrating when I was sewing with it that it does stretch. I continued sewing up my side seams with these little clips. I don't know why I left that in, but you know what, it's fun. And I used that exact same stretchy straight stitch. We'll go with that. I don't know what else to call it. It's neither a lightning stitch nor a zigzag stitch. With my side seams together, I was able to connect the tops of my layers and carefully baste those together. I used the standard straight stitch while basting just because I needed to see how it looked. I needed to get a feel of how this would fit me. And here you can see, this is my first try on. I was pretty unhappy. Look at all that gapping towards the bust. I considered doing a dart there, but what I really realized is that I needed to raise the front and take in about 1 inch off of both of these side seams. That was able to get rid of that gap that I was having at the bust line pretty easily. Once I got my fit figured out, I was able to add on some binding. I just used my Moleskine tricot for a binding along the top edges and to make my straps. Simple, just going along and then folding it over twice to hide all of my raw edges inside and stitching down everything. Lots of pin here because I don't want things to shift around. This fabric is also pretty slippery, so I would rather overpin than underpin. And here's how that binding looked once I was done with it. Once again, all of these fabrics that I'm using for this dress, pretty slippery, so just take your time. To finish it out, I used these little hooks and bars to add on my straps, and then I was all done. I actually really like this dress. I think it's pretty versatile. I think that it can be worn on its own here with some nice chunky statement accessories, and you have a fun little look, but then you can also kind of dress it down, as you're gonna see here in a second. I have been looking for a skirt that was literally like the bottom of this dress for like ever. So when I put this on and I realized, holy shit, I can just tie a t-shirt over top. Are you kidding me? This instantly skyrocketed to like one of my favorite pieces in my closet. Big fan of this. This next piece is a little tie front tank top deal, crop top situation, and I did it using McCall's, where is this number? M7789, and I used this black and gray fabric that if you've been here for a while, you'll recognize. It's the exact same printed quilter's cotton that I used for my like Beetlejuice themed dress back in October. I didn't have a lot left, but I did have just enough to make this top. I actually was really surprised that I had enough to even do that, because as you could see here, which is all of the fabric that I had laid out for this, there was not a lot to work with. Because there wasn't a lot of this fabric to work with, I really had to be careful with my positioning of these pattern pieces, and I had to make sure that I left no scrap behind. This is a no scrap left behind household. This was pretty simple though. I basically followed the instructions in this pattern. There's nothing super crazy to note about this construction. Yeah, I mean, quilter's cotton is a super simple thing to work with, so we're just using a standard straight stitch, having fun with it, doing the best we can with what we got. I would say the biggest thing of note whenever it comes to not just quilter's cotton, but basically any natural fiber, like linen or wool, is you gotta really make sure that you're taking your time and iron and pressing everything flat. I don't know what the fuck this clip is. I guess I'm just showing you that me and my friend Harmony were listening to Ghost. I don't know. There it goes again. Why? What did I do that for? Anyway, with my inside and my outside put together, I went through and started ironing all of my little seams nice and flat. It's actually really incredible how different a garment can look before and after you iron. And the same with even a basic simple seam. A nice flat ironing can really make an amateur garment look much more professional. 10 out of 10, do recommend, even though ironing is the devil. This clip is literally in here just so you can see like the ironed side next to the unironed side. I think it's just such a crazy little difference. Are you kidding me? What the fuck? Why has it got any business looking like that? This top also has some boning installed along the side seams, which unfortunately I have no footage of that being installed. I don't know why, but here's the finished garment. I think it's super cute. I love that the straps can be worn straight up or off the shoulder, giving a much different vibe to the piece. Super excited to wear this during the summer. It's incredibly cute. Finishing out this project, I am making a jumpsuit that is pretty directly inspired by a Elle Rebel jumpsuit that's known as the Spellbound Keyhole jumpsuit, and I made the bottom part of this jumpsuit using McCall's M7789. I'm an absolute heathen whenever it comes to mashing up patterns, so while I used that pattern for the bottoms, I used McCall's 6989 for the top. The bottom pattern that I used also had a lot of excess volume that was presented in the form of a pleat, so I folded that out of my paper pattern and acted like it just didn't even friggin' exist. I'm very lucky, this worked out super well for me, and I had minimal adjustments using this method. With my pattern pieces all cut out, I took my fabric over to my trusty ironing board and forced it into submission with the use of heat and steam. After I stitched all of my side seams on these pants, I went ahead and hit it with an overlock stitch on my machine. If you don't have an overlock stitch or an overlock machine available to you, you can get a little foot like what I've got here, and you can actually just zigzag over the edge of your fabric for a pretty similar effect. I actually really recommend it. It's easier than having a whole separate machine for just that one function. After I got my seams all nice and tidy, I went ahead and started stitching them down flat using that same stretchy straight stitch that we used earlier with the tank top dress. I just did this out of preference. I prefer when pants have their seams stitched down like this, like on my carpenter jeans for work, so why not include it? Here's the pattern that I used for that top I was talking about, McCall's 6989. This is my favorite pattern in the whole world. It just fits me perfectly and I love working with it. I've used it for so many projects, and one day I'm going to lose this pattern. I have 2 copies, so I've kind of prepared for that day. But even then, one day it'll be gone from me, and I don't know what I'll do. I think I'll just cry, because it really is my all-time favorite pattern. I've had this one copy for 10 years now, and I've probably used it for about 5 to 7 different sewing projects. Like, this is literally my first fitting with this pattern, just to make sure the top fit before I connected it to the pants. And it just fits me perfectly. I don't know what kind of wizardry happened, fate occurred for me to have my hands on this little pattern, but I love it. I wanted the top to mimic the pants in terms of having the seams stitched down, just to give everything a more cohesive look. So I'm doing the same thing that I did to my pants to the top. And here they are, combined, the top and the bottom sewn together. Pretty happy with that fit. But obviously, we're missing that keyhole cutout that was integral to that design. So what did I do? I stitched it onto some newspaper and I held it up to see how I thought it looked. After I figured out the size, I went ahead and I transferred that design over to some extra fabric to make a facing. I'm gonna stitch along this line that I've traced out, and as you can see, I had some indicator lines to make sure everything was centered on the front of this bodice. I really took my time. I was like, if this thing ends up askew or in the wrong spot, I'm gonna be really, really bummed. At the end of the day though, I'm super happy with where this ended up being positioned, even if it's a little bit higher than the design that this jumpsuit is based off of. After my facing was sewn on that outline, I took some scissors and I carefully trimmed the seam allowance as close as I felt comfortable to that line. Because this is a curve and this whole thing's going to be flipped inside out, which you'll see in a second, I really wanted to make sure there was as little extra fabric as humanly possible. With my seam allowance cut, I went ahead and began clipping some curves so that way this would have a nice clean edge once it was flipped. And then I began flipping. I actually got a little disheartened at this point because I didn't think it looked right. But once I started adding in pins and pushing everything to the exact spot it needed to be, it really started to take shape. This is absolutely another case of like me going overboard with pins, but because this one detail is so front and center, I really wanted to make sure everything lined up exactly how I wanted it and that nothing would move around while I was sewing it at the machine. And then I began stitching it down. I went around the entire outline of this with that same straight, stretchy stitch that I mentioned earlier. And here it is. I'm pretty happy with my top stitching here. Could have been better, could have been a lot worse, but let's get. The collar is basic. It's exactly what was presented in that pattern. I stitched my two pieces together and then I did the same thing with like top stitching, yada, yada, yada. Consistent details. We're trimming one inside seam. We're gonna fold the other seam allowance over top and then we're gonna sew it down. That's what we do here, okay? Sometimes I like visible top stitching on a project, sometimes I don't. In this case though, fuck it, we ball. Visible top stitching on literally every seam on this garment. And I do mean every seam. And for no other reason than because she deserves love and affection, here is my old cat Delilah, who decided that a random string on the ground was the most exciting thing she had seen in at least 10 years. I haven't seen her this excited in at least a week, I don't know. She's an old girl. So I got the first seam stitched for my collar, which meant that I could install my zipper along the back. This fabric is actually stretchy enough that the zipper terminates at my waistline and doesn't have to continue down the back seam of the pants. That's not typical though. I just got really, really lucky with this pattern and the stretch of this fabric. With that zipper installed, I can finally turn the inside lining of this collar inwards, concealing that seam allowance, and then stitch it down from the outside. Once again, highlighting that top stitching detail that's present on most every other seam on this jumpsuit. This jumpsuit is actually what kind of inspired this whole idea of like making and updating my wardrobe. I saw this a couple of years ago and I fell in love with the design, but could never really justify spending the money on it because I don't go out a lot. But knowing that I have the ability to not just find the fabric, but put it all together and basically design it myself, or copy the design myself, means that I can make whatever the fuck I want, whenever the fuck I want. And that level of freedom is definitely one of the best parts about learning to sew. It's a pretty easy thing once you actually set your mind to it and you dedicate the time to it. I know that I'm saying that, I have 10 years of experience, but seriously, give it a shot. You might have more fun than you think.